My name is Samuel Ortiz, and until the day I died, I never thought birthdays could offend God. In fact, I thought they were one of the purest, happiest moments in a person's year. Candles glowing, family singing, laughter filling the room. I grew up in a tight-knit Hispanic family where birthdays were sacred, but in a different way than the Bible describes anything as sacred. It was a day when all eyes were on you, when you were king or queen for 24 hours. My grandmother would always say, "Mijo, today is all about you." Looking back now, those words sound different. I was a youth leader in my local church, married to my high school sweetheart, and raising 2 little girls. Outwardly, my life was blessed. A stable job in logistics, a small but growing house in Texas, and a calendar always marked with family gatherings. But what I didn't know was that my spiritual life had slowly been infiltrated by things I never questioned, things I simply inherited from culture and tradition. The year I died. On the morning of his 38th birthday, Samuel Ortiz awoke with the soft light of Texas creeping across his blinds. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen where his wife prepared breakfast, and for a moment everything seemed ordinary, safe, familiar. Yet even in that ordinary rhythm, his chest felt tight, like an invisible weight pressing down. He pushed it aside, convincing himself it was nothing but stress or excitement for the evening ahead. Tonight, family and friends would gather, candles would glow, laughter would rise. He had grown up believing birthdays were sacred in a cultural sense. Sacred because they stitched generations together, because they crowned the individual with attention and cheer. He never once thought that such celebrations could offend the heart of God. But before the day was done, his assumptions would be shattered in a way no human could prepare for. By noon, the dizziness worsened, and every step felt as though the floor tilted beneath him. He smiled for his children, let his wife keep planning the surprise, and pressed forward. As guests began arriving, the familiar song swelled. Happy voices, clapping hands, eyes on him. The sound was warm, but beneath it ran a hollow echo that only he seemed to hear. His vision narrowed into a tunnel, the edges blurring, and then silence swallowed the room. Samuel's body collapsed before the candles could be blown out. Gasps, cries, frantic movement filled the living room, yet he heard none of it as his soul slipped from its shell. You move with him now, following the strange sensation of being pulled backwards, as though unseen hands were yanking him from the scene. One heartbeat he was staring at faces twisted with fear, the next he was above them, detached, weightless. The paramedics rushed in, voices urgent, but Samuel was already somewhere else. It was not darkness that greeted him, but a radiance that seemed to stretch without end. A tunnel opened before him, and he was drawn through it, faster than thought, deeper than dream. The air in that place had substance. It vibrated with color and sound beyond earthly senses. Every hidden thing of his heart seemed uncovered, exposed in the brilliance. He tried to cover himself, yet realized he wore no flesh. His body was different, more alive than it had ever been, every fiber resonating with awareness. He felt the prayers of his wife faintly, like echoes carried across galaxies, but they could not anchor him back. He was stepping into eternity, and eternity was stepping into him. The tunnel released him into a vast expanse where there was no sun, yet light illuminated everything. It was a light that did not merely shine upon but penetrated within, searching the marrow of the soul. The sensation was both terrifying and strangely comforting, like standing before a mirror that reflected not the face but the truth. He tried to speak, to call out, but no words formed. The silence was immense, and yet in that silence a presence began to grow. It came stronger than a hurricane, yet gentler than a whisper. The atmosphere shifted, the very air seemed to bend under its weight. Samuel turned, trembling, and saw him. Jesus. There was no doubt, no guessing, no need for introduction. His eyes burned with fire and love simultaneously, drawing Samuel in and piercing through him. Samuel fell inwardly, undone, as though every defense he had ever raised crumbled in that gaze. The presence was overwhelming, yet it carried tenderness that wrapped him like a blanket. He wanted to hide, and yet could not stop staring. In that moment, Samuel's entire life seemed to unfold around them like living film. Birthdays from his childhood, gatherings with family, laughter, and candles. Jesus did not greet him with casual words, but with a summons that shook him to the core. He called him by name, and in that calling Samuel realized something profound. He was known. Not just known in the sense of facts remembered, but known in the depth of his being, where even unspoken thoughts were laid bare. All washed over him, fear intertwined with reverence. The tunnel, the light, the separation from his body, these were the gateway. The real encounter was standing before the one who held both judgment and mercy in his hands. Samuel's mind raced back to his life in Texas, to his stable job, his daughter's laughter, his role as a youth leader. Outwardly blessed, inwardly complacent. He had thought little of the subtle ways tradition had crept in, unchallenged, into his walk of faith. And now, face to face with eternity, he realized those innocent traditions carried a weight he never imagined. The emotion of shock pulsed through him. This was not how he expected death to feel, not what he imagined a birthday to reveal. He thought he knew the boundary between fun and faith, between harmless celebration and holy worship. Yet already, before a single word of explanation left Jesus' mouth, Samuel sensed the foundations of his understanding cracking. Something larger was being revealed, and he would not be allowed to return unchanged. In that holy pause, you can almost feel the air yourself, thick, alive, humming with the reality that nothing is hidden here. Every heartbeat is exposed, every motive laid bare. It is the beginning of judgment, yet also the beginning of redemption, for Samuel is not here merely to be condemned. He is here to be shown, to be taught, to be sent back with a warning the world will not want to hear. And all of it began with the collapse of a man on his birthday, surrounded by song, thrust suddenly into eternity. The brilliance of that place held Samuel as if suspended in eternity. He was no longer Samuel the worker, the husband, the father, the youth leader. He was simply a soul laid bare before the Creator. Every breath of this realm was infused with light, not the cold shine of stars, but a warmth that searched deeper than any flame. He looked down and realized he no longer wore the clothes of his birthday gathering. Instead, his body shimmered with a radiance that pulsed in rhythm with the very atmosphere. He reached to touch his chest, and though no flesh met his hand, he felt more real than ever before. You move with him through this moment, sensing how thin the veil truly is between what we think life is and what life actually means in eternity. Samuel tried to speak, to explain his confusion, to ask if this was heaven, but his lips did not move. He did not need words. In this place, thought itself was sound, and even before the questions formed, the answers pressed against him like waves. He was being known, not interrogated, but known in the way a gardener knows the soil, a father knows his child. The awareness of being seen so completely filled him with awe. There were no shadows to hide in, no excuses to polish, no masks to wear. His soul trembled under the weight of such exposure, and yet, strangely, there was no rejection in it. He was not cast out by the light. He was invited to stand within it. Then the presence deepened, and he felt it before he saw it. A hush fell, though no sound had been made. The expanse around him seemed to bow, as though all creation was leaning forward in reverence. And then he came. Jesus stepped into view, not as an idea, not as an icon, but as the living one. His form radiated a glory that did not blind but compelled, drawing Samuel in like a moth to a flame, yet holding him steady so he would not be consumed. His eyes carried both gentleness and fire, the kind of gaze that could heal a wound and pierce a fortress at once. Samuel's heart thundered within him, though it was no longer the fragile organ that had failed in his body moments before. This was the pulse of his very being quaking in recognition. He dropped, or tried to, but there was no floor to fall upon. His spirit bowed all the same. The awe was unbearable, and yet he could not look away. Jesus spoke, not with the tones of distant thunder, but with the intimacy of a whisper that filled the entire expanse. Samuel. One word, one name, and it shattered him. In that moment, Samuel knew the truth of it. Heaven calls you by name because you are not forgotten. You are not a number in eternity. You are not an accident drifting in a sea of billions. You are known. The awe carried a sharp edge of fear. Not fear of punishment, but fear of unworthiness. Samuel remembered every careless word, every hidden sin, every compromise he had brushed aside. All of it stood naked before this gaze. He thought of the birthdays where he had been the center of attention, the youth gatherings where his prayers were more performance than surrender, the countless times he had sung words of worship but kept his heart tethered to self. And yet, Jesus had called him by name. That mixture of dread and relief tangled in his spirit until he could scarcely bear it. Then Jesus moved closer, and with every step the atmosphere thickened like a storm building. The light pressed harder, peeling back layers Samuel had not even known he carried. Childhood memories flickered. Candles, cakes, the voices of family singing. Scenes he had never questioned began to stir unease as they replayed. His grandmother's words echoed, "Today is all about you." And for the first time those words did not sound sweet. They sounded dangerous. He felt the truth forming before Jesus even spoke it. Traditions carried weight, and weight could either lift toward heaven or sink into darkness. The awe turned to trembling. Samuel's spirit quaked, but he could not escape. He realized this was not merely a meeting, it was a revelation. The one who stood before him was not coming to comfort his confusion only. He was coming to uncover, to strip away the illusions Samuel had worn like birthday crowns his whole life. He was about to expose not just the man, but the culture, the rituals that had nestled themselves into his faith without question. You can feel the shift yourself, can't you? The soft awe of being called by name hardens into the ache of knowing something heavy is about to be said. The emotion of awe has its beauty, but it also has its terror, because awe always brings responsibility. Samuel could not hide from it, and neither can you. Jesus was about to show him that what millions consider harmless traditions, things that feel innocent, joyful, even holy, were, in fact, invitations for shadows to gather. The expanse grew quiet again, but the quiet was electric, vibrating with what was to come. Jesus lifted his hand, and the space around them shimmered. Samuel felt his stomach twist as scenes of his life began to form like living murals suspended in the air. Birthday parties, family celebrations, children clapping, friends laughing. Each frame glowed for a moment before shifting into the next, as though the sum of his life's celebrations had been collected and displayed here. His awe deepened. He realized he was not merely remembering. He was being shown. This was heaven's perspective, and heaven's perspective does not flatter. It reveals. The awe gave way to anticipation and dread, because Samuel could sense it. Jesus was about to speak. And once he spoke, nothing Samuel had ever believed about birthdays, about tradition, about what it meant to celebrate life would remain the same. The awe was the gateway. Conviction was coming next. The expanse around Samuel flickered, and suddenly he was standing inside the memory of his own 10th birthday. His heart jolted as he saw his younger self at the table, cheeks glowing with joy, family clapping and laughing. Frosting smeared across the child's face, balloons bobbing, candles lit. At first, it seemed harmless, innocent even. Yet as he gazed closer, shadows began to stir at the edges of the scene. Figures half-hidden, shifting, whispering, watching. They were not human. Their eyes gleamed with a hunger that was not for cake, but for worship misplaced. Jesus stood beside him, his gaze fixed not on the laughter but on the shadows. Samuel's chest tightened. He wanted to deny what he saw, to argue that it had been nothing more than a joyful day. But the longer he looked, the clearer it became. Each cheer, each clap, each word that made the child the center of the universe seemed to feed the shapes. Their smiles widened every time Samuel's family exalted him, every time the phrase "it's your special day" was uttered. The warmth of the party warped into something heavier. What once felt like love now felt like a trap. You can almost hear the echo yourself, can't you? Those familiar words, make it all about them. Let them feel like royalty for the day. They sound sweet, but Samuel realized here that they carried poison hidden in sugar. His grandmother's voice, once cherished, returned to his ears. "Mijo, today is all about you." He winced. In that radiant expanse, the words rang hollow, dangerous. Jesus spoke, his tone both tender and sorrowful, and Samuel's soul quivered under it. He explained that birthdays, in their modern form, often shift from gratitude to God into glorification of self. The one being celebrated is elevated, even idolized, until the Creator is forgotten. Samuel watched as his younger self was lifted onto an invisible pedestal. Every clap, every cheer built the pedestal higher. At first, it seemed like nothing, a symbolic gesture. But soon the pedestal grew into a tower, and the higher it rose, the further the child drifted from the light of God. Samuel gasped. He saw himself basking in attention, unaware that shadows swarmed closer with every brick stacked. The room looked the same, but spiritually it was a rehearsal of pride. His heart broke. He wanted to cry out, but it was just a birthday. Yet the truth pressed in. Lucifer himself had fallen because he sought glory that belonged to God alone. Pride was never harmless. Pride was always a doorway. Jesus' voice pierced the vision, steady as a blade. He reminded Samuel that the scriptures declare God will not yield his glory to another. And yet, year after year, people yield it themselves with innocent smiles and songs. The words "you deserve it. Today is about you" echoed like accusations, exposing how language dressed as love could plant rebellion deep into the soul. Samuel trembled. How many times had he heard those phrases at parties for his children? How many times had he said them himself, believing it was kindness? He remembered standing at his daughter's 6th birthday, beaming as everyone shouted princess for a day. Now, with heaven's perspective, he saw the shadows lurking behind her chair, feeding on the exaltation. His heart cracked in grief. Emotion swelled, conviction so sharp it burned. This wasn't about rejecting joy. Jesus made clear that he himself had created celebration. He loved laughter, song, and gathering. But celebration without him, celebration that exalted the creation over the Creator, became idolatry cloaked in balloons and frosting. Samuel saw the truth with painful clarity. Each time someone celebrated themselves above God, the enemy recognized his own nature in them. The shadows weren't accidents. They were invited guests, drawn to the aroma of self-worship. The vision shifted suddenly, moving forward in time to Samuel's 30th birthday. He sat at a long dinner table, expensive plates before him, friends raising glasses high. The prayer over the meal had been short, obligatory. But when it came time to toast him, the energy exploded. Cheers, clapping, applause, all eyes fixed on him. And again, in the heavenly replay, shadows crept closer. Their delight was palpable, their whispers thick in the atmosphere. Samuel groaned, clutching his chest. How had he been so blind? He thought he was simply receiving love, but heaven saw a rehearsal of rebellion. You can feel the weight too, can't you? The heaviness of realizing what you once thought harmless was, in fact, dangerous. Conviction has a way of pressing like a stone on the heart. Samuel's spirit bowed under it. He remembered moments he had cherished and now saw differently. His tower of self-exaltation had been built brick by brick, party by party, cheer by cheer. And each brick had given space for shadows to linger. But then, like dawn breaking, Jesus showed him a different vision. The same 10th birthday replayed, but this time the family circled him not with clapping hands, but with bowed heads. They prayed over him, thanking God for his life, asking heaven's blessing. Instead of shadows, Samuel saw angels filling the room, their voices harmonizing with the prayers, light flooding every corner. His eyes welled with tears. This was what it could have been. This was what it should have been. A day not about self, but about the giver of life. Joy that drew heaven closer instead of shadows. Jesus turned to him, eyes aflame with both sorrow and hope. Samuel shook, but he understood now. The first ritual was revealed, its mask ripped away. Birthdays had become altars of pride, rehearsals of vanity disguised as celebration. And the enemy feasted. The conviction was unbearable, yet mercy was still present in the voice of the one who showed him. This was not condemnation. This was unveiling, and with unveiling came responsibility. The scene dissolved, and Samuel's spirit felt suspended in silence. His heart still trembled from the first revelation, but Jesus' gaze did not soften. Instead, the weight of his presence thickened, as though the air itself was preparing Samuel for the next unveiling. You can almost feel it too, can't you? That heavy anticipation when you know the truth is about to cut deeper, and there is no way to escape it. Samuel braced himself, though he had no ground to stand on. Only the unshakable presence of the Lord holding him upright. The light around them shifted, forming a new memory. Samuel saw himself again, much younger, leaning forward over a cake with glowing candles. Family surrounded him, clapping, smiling, urging him to close his eyes. His child self obeyed, squeezing his lids tight, folding his little hands, not in prayer but in secrecy. He whispered a wish silently into the air, then blew with all his might until the smoke curled upward like incense. Everyone cheered, oblivious. But here, in this heavenly replay, Samuel's ears were opened to sounds he had never heard before. Whispers, dark, chilling whispers, slithered from the shadows near the table. They were not the voices of family, but of something unseen, urging, mocking, feeding. Jesus' voice broke the scene. This is ritual too, the candle wish incantation. Samuel's stomach sank. He had thought of it as harmless tradition, a cute game for children, a moment of laughter. But in this place of pure truth, he saw something more sinister. Jesus explained that when a person closes their eyes, focuses their desire, and casts it into the air without invoking God's name, it mirrors the very structure of sorcery. Secrecy, intent, and words unoffered to the Father. These were the bones of occult practice, disguised under frosting and flame. Samuel's spirit recoiled. He had never connected the dots. Yet now, with eyes opened, he could not deny it. The scene replayed again and again. His childhood birthdays, his teenage ones, even the parties he had hosted for his own daughters. Each time, the pattern was the same. The hush before the blow, the whispered wish, the smoke rising like a signal flare into the unseen realm. And each time, angels stood still, unmoving, because no prayer had been directed to the Father. But other spirits, darker ones, leaned closer, noting the invitation. Samuel groaned as guilt pierced him. He had taught his children to do this, smiling as they pressed their eyes shut, telling them, "Don't say it out loud, or it won't come true." Those words now rang like betrayal in his ears. The fear of realization swelled. You can feel it too, can't you? That cold wave when you recognize that what you thought was innocent may have been a snare all along. Samuel wanted to cry out, to undo years of misplaced words, but all he could do was watch as the visions played. Jesus explained with sorrow that this ritual trains hearts from childhood to direct hope into the unseen without anchoring it in him. It is a seed, subtle and dangerous. That seed grows into habits of prayerlessness, impatience, and eventually a hunger for spiritual forces outside the will of God. It begins small, hidden in sugar and frosting, but its fruit is bitter rebellion. The vision shifted to show contrast. A different birthday table appeared, candles glowing brightly. But instead of silence and secrecy, the child lifted their voice in prayer. Lord, thank you for another year. Help me live to please you. At those words, the flames burned brighter. Angels leaned in, rejoicing. The atmosphere filled with light. No shadows dared approach. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. It was so simple, yet so powerful. A tiny shift. Replace secrecy with prayer, replace wishing with thanksgiving, and the entire atmosphere changed. He realized how blind he had been, how blind so many were. Jesus looked at him with a gaze that pierced yet comforted. Samuel, when my people close their eyes and entrust their desires to the wind, they learn to put hope in emptiness. But when they lift their desires to my Father in my name, heaven moves. Teach them to see the difference. The words rang with authority, and Samuel felt them etch into his very being. Fear mingled with mercy. He was terrified by how deeply this ritual had infiltrated his life, yet grateful that light was exposing it before it was too late. The whispers of the shadows still echoed in his memory. Make a wish. Keep it secret. Speak it into the air. They no longer sounded playful. They sounded poisonous. Samuel trembled, realizing he had been complicit in passing down something heaven grieved over. He felt the fear of God press harder on his chest, not crushing but refining, purging. The candle wish incantation was no longer just a ritual in his eyes. It was a doorway, and Jesus had swung it wide open to expose the darkness within. The fear of realization settled into him like ice, sharp and clear. He wanted to repent, to weep, to beg for forgiveness, but Jesus held him steady. The revelation was not finished yet. There were still more shadows to confront. The vision did not release him. Samuel's heart pounded as Jesus' words echoed in the silence. This is why heaven grieves. His spirit trembled, because he now saw not only his own childhood but the faces of his daughters leaning over cakes, their little eyes squeezed shut, whispering desires into darkness. The images replayed with brutal clarity, his youngest clasping her hands, her lips moving silently, the crowd urging her, "Don't tell anyone your wish, or it won't come true." Samuel's stomach twisted. He had smiled, even laughed, encouraging them. Now, in the piercing light of eternity, he realized he had been guiding them into patterns that heaven despised. You can feel his sorrow, can't you? That deep ache of a father who thought he was giving joy but sees now that he was planting seeds of emptiness. His heart cracked under the weight of guilt. He had led them into secrecy, into a habit of hope without prayer, into an imitation of magic dressed up as innocence. The tears he could not shed in his earthly body now flowed inside his spirit, thick and heavy, though they left no wetness. Sorrow, sharper than any blade, cut him open. Jesus did not withdraw, though. His gaze held both fire and mercy. He lifted his hand again, and the atmosphere shifted. The vision of his daughters faded, replaced by another scene. A child sat before candles, the flames flickering brightly. But this child spoke aloud, not a wish, but a prayer. "Lord, thank you for this year of life. Help me grow to please you." The words were simple, childlike, but the effect was staggering. The flames flared higher, shining like little suns. Angels appeared, surrounding the table, their voices rising in song. Light poured over the family. There were no shadows lurking in the corners, no whispers in the dark. The atmosphere was holy. Samuel's sorrow deepened, but a thread of hope wound itself through the grief. He saw the contrast so vividly that it etched into his soul. It wasn't about rejecting birthdays. It was about reclaiming them, purifying them. What had been offered to the air could instead be lifted to heaven. What had been a ritual of secrecy could become a moment of worship. He realized that the line was razor thin, yet the consequences eternal. Jesus turned to him, his expression unshakable. "Samuel, what you call harmless teaches hearts how to live without me. From childhood, they learn to entrust desires to silence instead of my Father. And when they grow older, they struggle to entrust them to me. Do you see?" Samuel nodded weakly, sorrow spilling through him. He understood. Every whispered wish was training. Training to look elsewhere for answers. training to hope in wind and secrecy instead of in the name that saves. You can almost feel the heaviness with him, can't you? That weight of realization that what seemed so small had such great consequence. His sorrow pressed into his chest until it felt like he could collapse again, even in spirit. He thought of the birthdays still to come for his daughters, the temptation to continue the rituals simply because that's what everyone does. He knew now he could never return to that blindness. The sorrow was holy, pressing him into the truth. Jesus spoke again, his tone gentler now, as though wrapping balm around Samuel's wound. I do not show you this to condemn. I show you so you can turn and strengthen your brothers. Teach them to test every tradition in the fire of my word. If it cannot stand in my light, let it die. Those words, though firm, carried mercy. Samuel felt the sorrow bend toward hope. He realized this was not a death sentence over his past, but a call to repentance for the future. He could change. He could lead his family into a different way. The vision of his daughters returned for a moment, but this time he saw them differently. Not whispering wishes, but speaking prayers, their young voices filling the room with thanksgiving. The angels leaned near them as if bending close to catch every word. Samuel's sorrow cracked open further, and hope began to seep through the fracture. He longed for this new image to become reality. He longed to guide his daughters into this way, to redeem what he had unknowingly corrupted. The sorrow still lingered heavy, like a mantle draped across his shoulders. But within it, there was light. Sorrow that leads to repentance, sorrow that births change. Samuel bowed inwardly, whispering without sound, "Yes, Lord. I see. I will change." The vision faded, but the grief did not. Samuel understood now that birthdays were not trivial. They were battlegrounds, subtle yet powerful. And heaven had been watching all along. The sorrow in Samuel's chest had scarcely settled when Jesus lifted his hand once more. The light around them swirled, and a new vision unfolded, heavier than the last. Samuel braced himself, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to see. He stood now in a banquet hall from his own memory, though he hadn't thought of it in years. Streamers dangled across the ceiling, balloons bobbed in the corners, the hum of conversation and laughter filling the air. It was his 25th birthday. He remembered the smell of roasted meats, the shimmer of wrapped boxes stacked high on a table, the excitement of opening one gift after another. At first, nostalgia pricked his heart, until the light of eternity revealed what had been hidden. As he watched himself open a sleek, expensive watch given by a coworker, something caught his eye. A thread, faint but unmistakable, stretched from the gift in his hand back to the giver. It pulsed like a cord, invisible to the natural eye, but glaringly obvious in this vision. Samuel recoiled. The thread wrapped not around his wrist but around his soul, tying him subtly, binding him in a way he had never felt before. He staggered backward, clutching his chest. Jesus' voice came, solemn and piercing. "This is Ritual 3, the covenant through gifts." Samuel's spirit sank. He had always loved receiving gifts, had considered them tokens of love. But here, in the blazing clarity of heaven's light, he saw the truth. Gifts could carry motives, covenants, even curses. Jesus explained that giving was holy when done in his name, flowing from pure love. But when pride, manipulation, or hidden allegiance fueled the gift, it became a hook, an invisible tether binding soul to soul in ways unseen. Samuel shook his head in disbelief. He wanted to argue, to insist that his coworker had only been generous. But the cord pulsed darker, revealing a subtle exchange beneath the surface, a quiet expectation of loyalty, a pull toward compromise. You can almost feel the heaviness, can't you? That realization that something as joyful as unwrapping paper could conceal an unseen bond. Samuel's sorrow deepened into dread. He thought of other gifts through the years, moments when he felt indebted, pressured, obligated long after the celebration had ended. He remembered favors demanded later, relationships that bent under invisible weight, choices influenced by a sense of owing something he could not explain. Now he understood, those weren't accidents. They were covenants sealed in the giving. The vision expanded. Samuel saw ancient feasts where offerings to idols included food, drink, and gifts. The spirits behind those feasts fed on allegiance, binding people with invisible cords. Jesus' eyes burned with sorrow. Today, the idol is often the self, and the gift becomes an offering to it. My people do not see it, but the enemy does. Samuel groaned, his heart heavy. He saw a cascade of gifts he had received, books that pulled his mind subtly away from Scripture, jewelry that carried strange heaviness in his home, objects that always felt restless, but he never questioned. Each item sprouted cords, tethers, some faint, some thick, all attaching him to the giver or to something darker. He wanted to tear them off, to scream, but the cords held tight in the vision. Then Jesus showed him another scene. A different kind of gift, one given in purity. A child offering a simple drawing to her father. No strings, no expectation but love. Light burst between giver and receiver, illuminating the room. Angels recorded it, joy overflowing. No cords, no shadows. Just freedom. Samuel's heart lifted slightly, though the weight of the vision remained. He realized the truth. It was not the act of giving itself that was dangerous, but the spirit behind it. Gifts carried weight, and weight could either bless or bind. Jesus' voice grew firmer. My people must discern. Pray over every gift. Dedicate it to me before you use it. In this way, every curse is broken, every tether severed. What is pure will remain, what is corrupt will die. The words pressed into Samuel like fire branding his soul. The heaviness settled thickly. He thought of how many birthdays he had celebrated without a thought, how many presents had entered his home unexamined, how many ties might have been formed in ignorance. He realized this was not just his story. This was the story of millions, living unaware of the spiritual transactions happening in moments they thought were filled with joy. You feel that weight too, don't you? The awareness that innocence is not always protection, that the unseen realm takes every opportunity. Samuel bowed inwardly, his spirit groaning. He understood now why heaven called him here. The truth was sharper than a sword, cutting through every assumption. The covenant through gifts was no small matter. It was a net cast wide, catching many without them even knowing. The banquet hall faded, but the heaviness lingered. Jesus' expression grew even more solemn. Samuel's chest tightened. He knew there was still more to be revealed, and it would be darker still. The banquet faded like smoke, and Samuel felt himself pulled into yet another scene. The air thickened, heavy with something darker than before. His spirit braced, for he knew now that each unveiling went deeper, cutting closer to the marrow. He clung to the presence of Jesus, yet even in that closeness, dread churned in his chest. The vision sharpened into a backyard at night. Strings of lights hung above, music thumped from speakers, laughter rang out across the yard. People lifted cups, shouted over one another, told jokes too sharp, laughed too loud. Samuel recognized it instantly, his own 21st birthday. The night he had thought harmless, even fun. The night he told himself he finally had the right to drink, to live a little. But here, the scene warped. What once looked like celebration now shifted into something grotesque. He saw spirits hovering above the crowd, like vultures circling carrion. Their whispers drifted through the air. It's your special night. No one will judge you. Indulge. Live free. Jesus' voice broke through, grave and steady. This is ritual 4, the night of license. Samuel's stomach dropped. He watched himself raise a glass, friends cheering. Every swallow dulled the light within him, dimming his sensitivity to God's spirit. Conversations he had forgotten replayed, laced with arrogance, pride, mocking. He saw arguments flaring between others, gossip spreading like wildfire, flirtations sparking between people bound to other marriages. All of it had seemed normal then, typical of a party. But now he saw the spiritual reality, an altar erected to the flesh, every indulgence recorded by the enemy as legal ground. You feel the grief with him, don't you? That crushing realization that what the world celebrates as harmless fun is, in fact, a gateway for darkness. Samuel trembled. He had thought birthdays were a free pass, a night when the rules bent, when sin lost its sharpness. But Jesus' eyes burned with sorrow as he showed the truth. The world teaches indulgence as freedom, but indulgence is a chain. My people forget that holiness is not suspended on special days. A birthday is no excuse to abandon me. Samuel's grief erupted. He saw how his laughter that night had not been joy but numbness, how the light in his spirit had dimmed under intoxication. He remembered waking the next day with regret, brushing it aside, never realizing how deeply it had wounded his soul. The enemy had feasted, delighting in the weakness cloaked as liberty. Then the vision shifted again. Another birthday scene unfolded, but this one glowed differently. A family gathered at a table, Bibles open, voices lifted in prayer. There was music, but it was pure. There was food, but no gluttony. Laughter rang, but it left no sting. Children played, angels sang. The presence of God filled the room, joy without regret, fun without sin. Samuel's eyes welled with tears. He wanted that. He wanted to give that to his family, to his daughters, to everyone who still thought the night of license was freedom. The grief pressed harder. You can feel it, can't you? That ache when you realize the enemy has stolen years under the disguise of joy. Samuel's shoulders slumped under the weight of it. He saw not only his own 21st birthday, but countless others. The clubs, the bars, the drunken laughter spilling into streets, the shame that followed. He saw believers, even leaders, giving themselves permission to indulge just this once because of a date on a calendar. And he saw the enemy rejoicing, whispering chains tighter around their souls. Jesus' voice broke through the heaviness, low and commanding. Samuel, tell them this. If you cannot invite me into your celebration, you are inviting another. Every feast has a guest of honor in the spirit realm. Let it be me. Samuel wept inwardly, grief clawing through him. He saw now that the night of license was the enemy's counterfeit of true joy, a parody of heaven's feasts. It left bodies empty, spirits dulled, souls burdened with regret. And all the while, the world called it freedom. He knew now it was bondage. The vision faded, but the grief did not. Samuel stood trembling, his soul crushed beneath the sorrow of what he had seen. He understood. Birthdays had become altars not of life, but of compromise. And he was being shown not only for himself, but to carry this warning back. The darkness of that backyard party dissolved into silence, and Samuel felt suspended in a stillness so heavy it pressed into his very bones. His spirit quivered. He had seen enough to last an eternity, yet he knew heaven was not finished. Jesus turned toward him, and with a sweep of his hand, the four visions appeared side by side in the air, each burning like living portraits. Samuel gasped as he looked upon them. The pedestal of self-exaltation, the candle wish whispered into shadows, the invisible cords tethering souls through gifts, and the night of license where sin wore the mask of freedom. They glowed with terrible clarity, every detail sharper than any memory he had ever held. Together, they formed a tapestry of deception so subtle and so widespread that his knees nearly buckled beneath the weight. You can sense that weight too, can't you? That recognition that what you once thought trivial is, in truth, a battlefield where eternity is at stake. Samuel trembled. The enormity of it washed over him. Not just his birthdays, not just his families, but the billions of celebrations across the world, all repeating these patterns without question. Jesus' face was solemn, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and fire. These four rituals are not harmless, he said. They are altars the enemy has built into culture. Even my house repeats them without question. Year after year, my people rehearse pride, secrecy, bondage, and indulgence, thinking it is innocent joy. But heaven sees differently. These things invite shadows. They give the enemy a seat at the table. Samuel groaned inwardly. Conviction weighed like a millstone. He thought of the churches he had served in, the youth parties he had helped organize, the moments he himself had stood smiling while these very rituals unfolded under banners of fellowship and fun. Now he saw them for what they were, open doors. His chest burned with grief, and yet within that grief flickered the spark of responsibility. Jesus' voice cut deeper. Samuel, you are not shown this for curiosity. You are shown because you are a watchman. Do you remember the words in Ezekiel? When the watchman sees the danger and does not blow the trumpet, the blood is on his hands. But if he warns and they refuse, their blood is on their own heads. The words thundered, yet they carried the gravity of love. Samuel felt them etch into his spirit like fire. He knew what this meant. He was not here simply to observe. He was being commissioned to carry this truth back into the world. The weight of responsibility fell heavy, like chains at first, then like armor. You can feel that shift, can't you? The burden is suffocating, but at the same time, it steels the spine. Samuel's heart pounded with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of ridicule. But beneath it all, a deeper resolve began to stir. He knew people would mock him, call him extreme, dismiss him as legalistic or superstitious. Yet he also knew he could not remain silent. To stay silent would be to betray the one whose eyes were burning into him now. The four visions pulsed again, and for a moment Samuel thought he could hear the cries of millions, souls celebrating without realizing what they had invited. It was unbearable. He wanted to look away, but Jesus kept his eyes fixed. Do not soften this, Samuel. Do not dilute the truth. My people must see that what they call tradition has become chains. Expose it. Sound the trumpet. Even if only a few listen, even if only a seed is planted, you will have been faithful. The weight grew heavier still, and yet strangely, Samuel felt his spirit straighten beneath it. He thought of his wife, his daughters, his congregation. He thought of how much he wished someone had warned him years earlier. His heart broke, but it also blazed with purpose. He whispered within himself, trembling but certain, "Yes, Lord, I will." The visions hovered, searing themselves into his memory so they could never be erased. Pride, secrecy, bondage, indulgence. For chains, for open doors, for rehearsals of rebellion. And he, Samuel Ortiz, had been sent to carry the trumpet. The portraits of the four rituals still hung in the air, blazing like eternal warnings carved into fire. Samuel's chest rose and fell with trembling breath. His spirit wanted to collapse under the weight, yet Jesus' gaze held him steady. There was no escape, no hiding, no pleading ignorance. He had been shown, and now he would be held accountable for what he carried. The silence broke with the authority of his voice. Samuel, you will not be believed by many. They will mock you. They will dismiss you. They will call you extreme. Some will say, it is only tradition. It is only fun. But you must speak, for I have made you a watchman. Those words shook Samuel more than the visions. He wanted to resist, to argue, to beg for someone else to carry this burden. You feel that hesitation too, don't you? That pull between obedience and the dread of ridicule. Samuel thought of his church, his friends, even his own family. How would they react when he told them that birthdays, those beloved, innocent-seeming celebrations, were doorways for darkness? The fear of rejection coiled around him, whispering its own lies. Stay quiet. Protect your reputation. Don't lose their love. But then Jesus' hand reached toward him, resting on his shoulder. The touch surged through him like fire and water all at once. Warmth flooded his spirit. Courage pressed into his bones. Every ounce of trembling seemed to melt into resolve. Jesus spoke again, softer now, but no less firm. Do not fear their faces. Your task is not to be popular, but to be faithful. They mocked the prophets before you, and they will mock you. But I am with you, and my strength will uphold you. Samuel's resolve hardened. The fear was still there. It would always be there, but it was no longer master over him. He remembered Ezekiel's warning about the watchman, the blood of the people on his hands if he refused to sound the trumpet. He could not bear that. Better to be mocked, better to be called a fool, than to stand silent while souls drifted into deception. He knew now that eternity was heavier than reputation, heavier than comfort, heavier than fear. The visions of the rituals shimmered and then pressed into his memory, not fading but fusing, so that they would never leave him. Jesus' eyes bore into him with both fire and tenderness. Samuel, I am entrusting you with this word. You must plant it, even if the soil looks barren. Seeds of truth never return void. Some will take root years later, but your job is not to control the harvest. Your job is to sow faithfully. The emotion coursing through him was resolve, fierce and unrelenting. Samuel felt as though heaven itself was sealing a covenant within him, binding him not with cords of darkness, but with chains of holy duty. He thought of his wife's tear-streaked face when he collapsed, his daughters waiting for their father to rise again. He thought of his congregation, of children who would repeat the rituals unless someone warned them. His jaw clenched. His heart beat hard. He whispered within himself, even if they hate me, even if they call me mad, I will speak. You feel that fire too, don't you? That moment when conviction ceases to crush and begins to empower. Samuel's spirit was ignited. He could not undo what he had seen. He could not unhear the warnings. He could only obey. Jesus withdrew his hand, but the strength he imparted remained. The silence wrapped around them again, but it was no longer the silence of dread. It was the silence of commissioning, the holy pause before being sent. Samuel understood now. His life was no longer his own. His return would not be for comfort, but for calling. He would carry the weight of ridicule, the loneliness of a prophet, the fire of a watchman. And he would carry it with resolve. The visions dimmed at last, fading into the brightness of eternity. Samuel bowed his spirit low, trembling but ready. The brightness of eternity throbbed like a heartbeat, and then suddenly Samuel felt himself pulled backward. The light receded, the weight of Jesus' gaze lifted, and a rushing wind carried him through a veil so thin it tore like paper. His spirit plunged into darkness for a blink, then surged back into the weight of his broken body. He awoke to chaos. Voices frantic, hands pressing on his chest, the sting of oxygen flooding his lungs. His wife's face hovered above him, wet with tears, her grip on his hand desperate as if she could drag him back by love alone. We've got him. A paramedic shouted, but Samuel barely heard. The vision still blazed behind his eyes, searing, unshakable. Heaven's words weighed heavier than the 4 needles, stronger than the shocks to his heart. He knew instantly. He had been sent back, not for himself, but for the message. You can almost feel that jolt, can't you? That disorienting collision between eternity's silence and earth's noise. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest, fragile and bruised, but his soul was burning like fire. He could not return to the way things were. He could not look at birthdays, at traditions, at celebrations with the same innocent blindness. He had seen too much. Days later, as he recovered in the hospital, Samuel began with his family. His daughters sat at the edge of the bed, their small hands folded. Instead of telling them to make wishes, He led them in prayers. Instead of whispering secrets to the air, he taught them to lift their voices to heaven. His wife joined him, and together they tore down the old rituals. No more pedestals of self-exaltation. No more candle wishes wrapped in secrecy. No more gifts unexamined, left unblessed. No more excuses for indulgence in the name of fun. From that day on, their birthdays became altars of thanksgiving, gatherings of light. Friends noticed the change. Some asked why there were no candles, no chance of it's your day. Some rolled their eyes, muttering that Samuel had become extreme. Others leaned in with curiosity, hearts stirred by the conviction they could not explain. Samuel didn't mind the mockery. He carried Ezekiel's warning in his spirit, heavy but holy. He was a watchman now. His job was not to win approval, but to blow the trumpet, no matter the response. The urgency gnawed at him daily. He could see it so clearly, the shadows circling unnoticed at parties, the whispers over cakes, the cords of gifts tying souls, the laughter masking sin. What the world called innocent, heaven called dangerous. What the church ignored, the enemy exploited. And Samuel, having seen the truth, could no longer remain silent. You feel the urgency too, don't you? That pull in your chest that whispers, this matters more than you think. Samuel carried it like fire in his bones. Every birthday became an opportunity, every gathering a chance to expose the counterfeit and reveal the holy. He did not condemn with bitterness. He spoke with tears, with trembling, with the weight of eternity pressing through his words. Some listened, some resisted, but seeds were planted all the same. Hope shone in him, fierce and steady. He believed that even if only a handful turned, even if only his daughters grew up free of the rituals, the trumpet would not have been blown in vain. His resolve was anchored not in numbers, but in obedience. He had died once, met Jesus, and returned with a warning. That was enough. That was everything. And so Samuel lived, no longer just as a man, but as a messenger. His birthdays would never again be about him. They would be about the one who gave him life, who took it, who returned it with purpose. His soul burned with urgency, but it also rested in hope. For he knew the words of Jesus would not return empty. They would pierce, they would plant, and they would prepare the world for the day when shadows would flee forever before the light. Beloved, let the story linger with you now. Do not rush past it as though it were merely another tale. Feel the weight of Samuel's warning pressing on your own celebrations, your own traditions. What we call harmless may be holy to the enemy, and what we call fun may be grief to heaven. Yet there is mercy here, great mercy. The same Jesus who exposed the shadows also showed the way to light. He did not forbid joy, he redeemed it. He did not strip celebration, he purified it. Pause with me in this quiet moment. Imagine your table filled not with whispers of wishes, but with prayers of thanksgiving. Imagine your family not circling you with applause, but surrounding you with blessings in God's name. Picture gifts prayed over, sanctified, glowing with freedom rather than cords. See the laughter of children ringing pure, not dulled by indulgence, but lifted by the Spirit's joy. This is what heaven longs for. This is what Jesus showed. Let your heart soften now. Release the chains of tradition that never came from the Father. Do not fear being mocked, for prophets and watchmen have always been ridiculed. Fear instead the silence of disobedience. Choose holiness over habit. Choose truth over tradition. Choose the giver of life over the fleeting exaltation of the day. And as the words fade, let them settle deep within you. Let them become seed, planted in the soil of your soul, ready to grow. If these words resonate with you, please leave an amen in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share it with at least 3 friends or family members right now. Now is your time to make a difference. Spreading this message is not only an act of love, but also a mission that Jesus himself has entrusted to you.